Introducing Wonderlight, a groundbreaking new Catholic video game from Loyola Press. Wonderlight gives kids a new way to engage with and talk about their faith, putting their lessons of discipleship into practice in a safe and fun way. Kids role-play discipleship in an epic adventure with a customized character that lets children imagine themselves in the world of the game. Learn more at wonderlightgame.com.
OSV is more than what most people think it is. We serve somewhere between 8 and 10 million people with everything from pamphlets to periodicals to books to fundraising, now church management software, religious education, and the list goes on. We're always looking for new ways to serve the church so that individuals, families, and parishes can draw closer to Christ.
Welcome to this NCA 2021 live session entitled Designing Observation Systems that Deepen Catholic Identity. Our presenters are Diane Floyd, Allison Helm, and Allison Rodman, representing the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. We invite you to actively engage with this presentation using the messaging and questions function in the event platform. At the conclusion of the session, you will have the opportunity to complete a post-session evaluation and provide feedback that will also track your participation in our sessions. If you run into any problems, we invite you to refresh your page or use the help section in the event platform. Presenters, thank you for being with us here at NCA 2021, and we turn it over to you for our start.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Scott. It is an absolute joy to be here with all of you. So I am joined by Diane Floyd and Allison Helm of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and my name is Allie Rodman of the Learning Loop. We're excited to engage with you this afternoon as we look to design observation systems that not only continue to improve our pedagogical practices of our teachers, but also deepen the Catholic identity of our staff members as well as our students. We want to ensure that you are able to engage as actively as possible in our work together this afternoon. So with that in mind, we know that it is a very common question. Can I get the slide deck? Can I get the materials following the session? We're going to send them straight to your inbox. We want you to be able to focus and take notes and really engage with one another during the course of our time together. So if you text NCEA 2021-observation to the phone number that is here on the screen, 773-770-4377, not only will you receive a copy of the slide deck, but you will also get some additional materials to support you as you look to possibly engage more deeply in this work. With that, I'm going to pass it to Diane Floyd, who's going to do some more formal introductions and tell you a little bit about our areas of focus.
Thank you so much, Allie, and good morning or good afternoon for some of us at this point as we've made that transition in the day. It is so great to be part of NCEA in this virtual environment this year, and we look forward to that time when we can gather together again. I'm Dr. Diane Floyd. I have had the honor of serving as superintendent of schools for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City for the past 5 years. Been 9 years in our central office. I formerly served in an associate superintendent role, and then prior to that, 16 years in the classroom and as a Catholic school, elementary school principal. And so I have been really fortunate to be able to do all of this work and be able to move into the superintendent's role, where we know that the job list of expectations is quite long. We think of our areas of focus, but in a particular way, I really enjoy spending my time with respect around strategic planning, areas of growth and continuous improvement, as well as curricular refinement and a special focus on school collaboration with our school leaders. I'm going to turn over to Allison Helm to let her introduce herself as well too.
Hello, as Dr. Floyd mentioned, my name is Allison Helm. I am the Associate Superintendent for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. I previously spent 7 years in one of our Catholic elementary schools as the principal. And then before that, I spent 10 years in the classroom as a classroom high school science teacher. I primarily focus on, this is my 5th year, I believe, yes, 5th year, in this role as Associate Superintendent, but my 23rd year in education. My primary role in the office is to focus on directing accreditation processes for all of our Catholic schools, in addition to assessments and school operations and safety.
Thank you so much, Allison. Again, my name is Allie Rodman. I am a full-time professional learning designer and facilitator, and I work with a wide variety of schools, including over 20 dioceses across the country, to support them not only with the design, but with a really strong facilitation of powerful professional learning experiences, and hopefully some of the observation and evaluation systems to support that along the way, so that our teachers see learning not just as a one-time workshop, but as that ongoing system of support. So we're now going to walk through how we went about engaging together in a needs assessment to determine what the areas of focus for that particular observation system and subsequent supports might look like.
Thanks, Allie, for kicking us off. So it's really important, as Allie said, to really think about how did we get to this point? Where did this process begin for us as an archdiocese? And while I wish it was because we were just so enlightened and were aware of our needs that we embarked on this journey, but as we all too often know, it isn't quite that easy or that simple. And in preparation for our presentation today, our team reflected on where we are now and where we began. In spring of 2018, we were very fortunate to have Allie Rodman join us to present to our school leaders in one of our monthly principal meetings. And that workshop started with the question and the focus of how can data be used to focus instructional improvement in the classroom. We had recently made the switch to using ACT Aspire, as well as some other assessments. And so we really were wanting to be able to help our school leaders take this back into their buildings and to be able to focus on that instructional improvement that we knew was needed. And so it was through that work that we quickly saw some gaps and needs for our leaders and their teachers as well. And this led us to really kind of drilling down into that assessment of our areas of need. So we first identified in the area of instructional practice, the need for very clear and measurable goals for students, something that seemed so simple and seems so innate to teaching. But we were just finding that sometimes teachers were not, when we would go back and do work with them with respect to curricular revision and planning, that the clarity of their goals and what they really desired for student learning and how they were measuring that just wasn't present. Secondly, we discovered just the need to continue to grow in academic rigor. I think Catholic education, one of our hallmarks is the fact that we do provide excellence in education, but we can't rest on our laurels and constantly need to be challenging ourselves. And part of that academic rigor was something that we knew we needed to begin to look for and help teachers to identify that. And then the final piece of that particular assessment was that consistent use of data to drive instruction. It's what started the conversation for us, and we realized there was a few things that needed to happen before we could really help teachers have that conversation and really in turn help our school leaders from our perspective to help their teachers with that. And so from there, we continued to identify those areas of need and started to really look at professional practice. How were we going to have those conversations with teachers about these areas of need, or really to discover what's working, what's not working, and continue to provide professional learning opportunities. So we started to really identify those areas of need within professional practice. This began with what we knew already coming in, and both Allison and myself and another colleague who was in the office at that time, that we knew what we had was a very dated system of feedback and evaluation. We were using a tool that was just a single observation touch point with broad development targets, something that you hoped teachers were meeting, but wasn't really giving them anything very specific. It provided binary feedback to them: satisfactory, unsatisfactory, meeting expectations, not meeting expectations. Really more of just felt like we were checking the boxes to make sure we were getting the task done. And it really lacked targeted and action-oriented feedback. And we felt like if we wanted teachers to be able to make a change and to continue to improve when needed, that we needed something that was more targeted for them. The more that we dug into it, we recognized that there was really an inconsistent utilization of the process across the Archdiocese. While I would love to think that all of our principals were using it, in fidelity, that wasn't the case. When it was being used, we found there were varied models out there, and so across all of our schools. And then what we found more than anything is with those varied models, we just lacked access to system-wide data to guide instructional improvement and really focus professional learning. While each of our schools are very unique in the populations they serve and in their areas of need, we knew there were some common threads that we could help facilitate from our perspective system-wide with respect to instructional improvement and that focused professional learning. And knowing was really half the battle. Once we knew, we felt like we could be much more purposeful in what we were planning for them. So with that clear path now, based on our assessed needs, we started to pose another question. How can our school leaders effectively collect high quality evidence of teaching and learning to improve teacher practice and ultimately student achievement? We know, especially for any of us that heard Dr. Fry's presentation yesterday, that these are, teacher effectiveness and teacher practice is just one of those, it just can move that needle so far with student achievement. And so that really led us back to that teacher observation and evaluation tool, and that we wanted it to promote growth. And so we really asked, what is the intent of performance review? What is the intent of providing this to our teachers? So drawing on our faith, we looked back to our Catholic identity to really seek that answer. We know that Jesus spoke of the uniqueness of each person and that the gifts that person has to share with others. His emphasis on the value of each person's gift is nowhere stated more clearly than in Paul's words to the Corinthians. There is a clear variety of gifts, but always the same Spirit. There are all sorts of services to be done, but always the same Lord, working in all sorts of different ways in different people. It is the same God who is working in all of them. It was those eloquent words of Paul that really served as the touchstone of our archdiocesan philosophy for evaluation of our teachers. Our evaluation process would embrace the teachings of Jesus, and that would emphasize the value of the individual person. We ask teachers to do this all the time for their students. Why would we not ask this for our teachers? So therefore, the philosophy really ensures that evaluation is going to be a process which first flows from the Christian message of love and concern for the individual. And secondly, it focuses on the positive. It builds on strengths and really seeks to affirm the uniqueness of all of our faculty and staff members, promoting growth in them as much as we want to promote growth within their students. I'm going to turn over to Allison next. She's going to share how we engaged in the design of our teacher performance framework, where we went next.
Thank you, Diane. As Diane stated, we had an obvious need to look at our evaluation system and how we could work to improve that. And so once we kind of had our areas of key areas identified, Allie and I, for lack of a better explanation, we took many different evaluative models, and we sat down in a room together and we spent an entire day reviewing all of these models and really looking at what we liked and what we didn't like, and how we thought we might be able to use them to benefit our communities. So we reviewed Charlotte Danielson, Framework for Teacher Evaluation, Robert Marzano's Focused Teacher Evaluation, Kim Marshall's Teacher Evaluation Rubrics, and the Effectiveness Performance Evaluation System from James Strong. And after looking at all of those, we determined that based on our needs and the fact that we wanted to focus on we knew that we wanted to focus on assessment, formative and summative assessment, to provide us with accurate and actionable evidence to inform our instruction and support student growth. We decided to pull out the assessment domain. Most of the time it was embedded in the instruction and assessment. We pulled out that assessment domain and made it an individual domain. In addition, we determined that because these are not based in our faith, we decided that we needed to also embed the NSBECS within the domains as opposed to a standalone. In our previous evaluation model, Catholic aspect, those Catholic standards were just separate, kind of over here by themselves, check, check, check. And we determined and decided that if we truly want to infuse the Catholic social teachings in our classrooms, which is what we ask our teachers to do in all subject areas, that we really needed to infuse those as well in our teacher performance tool. And so we sat down with all of those models. We determined 5 specific domains with which we were going to focus. And then we embedded those NSBECS in the domains to where they would appropriately fit. So as far as the design goal, it was an integration as opposed to a standalone segmented Catholic values, so to speak. So you'll see an example on your screen here for domain 1, which is planning and preparation, and how we purposefully embedded the NSBECS and how they are embedded within the domain. And not every domain specifically has part of the NSBECS, but they're all embedded within our 5 domains at some point.
So after we looked together at the ways in which we could co-design an integrated model, naturally the task before us was to begin thinking about, with our instructional leaders' capacity, what were the touch points where we could provide consistent and ongoing observation and review feedback to teachers without simultaneously overwhelming leaders. We knew that for many of the schools within the Archdiocese, actually most of them, they did not have an assistant principal, which meant that they were the instructional leader, they were the chief source of parent communication, and they also were dealing with many of the managerial tasks related to buildings and operation. While we continue to come back to that role of principal as instructional leader, we also wanted to ensure that we were co-developing a model that was going to move instructional practice and Catholic identity forward and be more deeply integrated, but that was also going to be sustainable for principals. So with that in mind, we identified, as Allison mentioned, these 5 domains of practice. Typically, in many of the models that we looked at, you saw those instruction and assessment domains bundled together. We wanted to ensure that they had a distinct place within the model so that we were continuing to push teacher development specifically in those areas. Unlike some other models or examples that we had looked at where the NSBECS and elements of Catholic identity and social and moral ethical decision-making was kind of off to the side or somewhat referred to within professional responsibilities, we wanted to be exceptionally clear about integrating that step by step with instruction, with assessment, and even with the classroom environment itself, so that over time, we were not only deepening our teachers' pedagogical practice, but also our teachers' and students' Catholic identity simultaneously. Those domains of practice were then reviewed by principals across different points in the year when we felt as though they would be most salient and received at the most effective points for teachers. So we recognized that to give leaders a whole host of targets to go in to observe and to measure and to take notes on was not only going to be overwhelming for the principals themselves, but also for the teachers who were receiving that feedback, making sense of it, and working to actively integrate it into their practice. So here we were thoughtful about looking at the content of each of the domains. What were the areas of focus? And how could we provide a more focused observation for both principals and teachers at critical points in the year to continue to move practice forward? So during the first quarter, we recognized how important it is to establish that learning community, to have a place that feels safe and feels respectful for all of our students. And because of that, the focus observation for quarter one that is in place across the Archdiocese focuses on classroom environment, that second domain. In quarter two, one of the things that we often find is that those strong instructional plans that we hit the ground running with at the onset of the year slowly start to get a bit more lax as we get tired and we head into the Thanksgiving holiday as well as winter break. So we wanted to ensure here that the quarter two focus observation really centered on high quality instruction, and that at some point during either quarter two or quarter three, the principal was also engaging with each teacher in an instructional plan review, where they were looking at their unit and/or lesson plans and giving them feedback on the plan itself, as well as the implementation of that feedback during their instruction-based focus observation. In quarter three, we recognize the importance of looking at that data that's been collected up until this point in the year and utilizing it even more deeply to ensure that students are progressing at an appropriate rate to have mastered all of the standards by the end of the year. So that quarter three focus observation really centers on the domain of assessment. And then finally, in quarter four, we wanted to provide an opportunity not only for leaders to provide teachers with a thoughtful feedback around how they were progressing in the areas of professional responsibility, but also to give teachers an opportunity to engage at the end of each year in some thoughtful self-reflection around the degree to which they had actively engaged as a member of the learning community. They were an example of not only Catholic identity and Jesus teachings within the school, but also within the broader community, and the ways in which collectively as a school community, we were working to move forward to build a truly vibrant and thriving place for students to learn. So here on the screen, you will see just a sample screenshot of one of the forms that was used during the course of the instructional plan review. So here we're selecting the teacher name, the teacher email. What is their experience level? Are they new to the Archdiocese or have they been with us for a while, and their grade band? And then after providing some open-ended evidence, leaders are also assessing the degree to which each teacher in each of these areas may be beginning, applying, or innovating in their practice. The intent here, while it is used for evaluation purposes, first and foremost is always a point of feedback. So the design was very intentional in putting the evidence first and the rating second, to ensure that the focus is on what we're seeing, but also collectively how we're going to take steps forward to improve practice on behalf of our students. We're going to have an opportunity to share a little bit more deeply about the forms themselves, how they're set up, and how they ultimately were analyzed to then lead to particular decisions in the professional learning for both principals and teachers. And we'll share more about that at the end of today's session. But I wanted to share just a bit here about the implementation timeline so that you had an idea of what this looked like in practice. Because the reality is this framework can feel rather large, and to move from a place that had a binary system with some broader descriptors to one that is a bit more robust with multiple touch points throughout the year, we wanted to make sure that not only were we gathering principal buy-in, but most importantly, teacher buy-in and investment along the way. So this, as Diane mentioned, was developed in the spring of 2018. We viewed the 2018-19 school year as a pilot year. And with that in mind, during that first year, really just focused on 2 of the 3 focus observations. So we looked at instruction and assessment. And then for leaders who had been doing a fair amount of observation and wanted to begin looking at and piloting the instructional plan review, we also gave them the option and the tools to begin exploring in that area. Then during the 19-20 school year, we added that 3rd and final focus observation, looking at classroom environment. And we also moved for that instructional plan review to be applied more consistently across the Archdiocese. At this point, we felt as though it was appropriate in the implementation and gauging the workload and the feedback from principals and teachers to leave the teacher and leader reflection at that time as an optional piece. The 2020-21 school year, I think threw a few curveballs at all of us collectively that we never could have anticipated. So as I'm sure you can imagine, we moved forward with a modified implementation for this past year, really focusing on some of the planning pieces to ensure that teachers were ready for virtual and hybrid environments, but then also looking ahead towards supporting both teachers and leaders for full implementation during the next school year. As I'm sure you can imagine, even with a scaffolded timeline, we needed to put some very specific and intentional supports in place to ensure that both teachers and leaders felt as though they had the skill set and the capacity to implement this successfully. So Diane's going to walk through what some of that implementation support looked like. Diane, I think you may be muted if you just want to go back and thank you.
Thank you. So sorry. Thanks for reminding me of that. So thanks again, Allie, for kind of showing us that overview of the whole, the timeline of the whole process. And I'm going to break it down just a little bit more specifically with how we went through and provided support with each year. Because as Allie shared, to look at it overall, we learned quickly that there were some places that it did feel overwhelming for our school leaders. And so when we look first at the 2018-2019 school year, as we introduced it to them, we started using we meet in monthly principal meetings. And so we use that format to be able to do professional learning specific months around this, the rollout of the performance review process. And so we kicked that off in September of that year with the introduction, really did a model overview for them, a walkthrough of the framework. Allie was there to do this with us. And then we did just an initial video observation. Part of this was, how do we start norming these tools that we'll now be using? Because that was one thing that we found even with the previous system, is that what some teachers were finding themselves as, meeting expectations. Another principal might be saying, well, you're exceeding expectations. And so really wanted to have some conversation around, what does best practice and good teaching look like? Because we were really all over the map with that. So then we really started going into intentional professional learning with that. And that took us to January of 2019. And we dove in really to the assessment piece, really kind of exploring domain 3, talking about what that looked like, and then always partnering that with a video observation. We tried many times to use our own teachers in practice to do these observations. Some were hesitant, of course, at first, but others were very willing and welcomed the feedback. And so used that in January to take that approach with it. And then really coming in March, because it timed not only with the work we had done in the assessment piece coming out of Q3, but that we also at that point would have had our standardized assessment results back, that summative assessment piece that we had with ACT Aspire. And so it really kind of took us full circle to where we'd had that first conversation the previous year around, we have all this data now. We have not only our teacher assessments that we're doing, the classroom assessments, but now we have the summative piece with Aspire. So let's look at our student achievement with respect to that. And then now as the school leaders, we have the observations we've been doing with our teachers. So as we got ready to close out that 2018-2019 school year, I think everyone's hair was blown back. We had some real lessons learned in that. And at every point in this, Allie was an amazing cheerleader in the effort because she would nudge us where we needed to be nudged and then support us, like provide us the supports to do that. And then she pushed us a little further and then have some built-in support there. And so we just determined that's what we needed to do with our principals as well. We really listened to the reflective feedback that they were giving us and used that to reflect on ourselves. And we needed to find a balance of expectations. One thing it really clued us into is that when we thought principals were just doing informal walkthroughs even, they just weren't getting into the classroom as much as we would have liked for them to. And I think we all, know and can relate to that experience. And so we really wanted to just take a step back and talk about the direct focused feedback we could really give from these instruments. All of them, while they admitted the challenges that came with time, I will say they were all still resoundingly had buy-in and support, as Ali spoke to it with that overview of the whole process, that they very much saw value in it and knew they needed to carve the time out. We listened to them and said, okay, then we can back this up a little bit and go slower. So that took us to year 2. As we started in that fall of 2019, and we started again with professional learning. But we really talked about how could this look different? Does it always have to happen in these whole group settings? Because this was elementary and our high school principals together. We were trying to watch these videos and norm them. And so we were definitely, some voices were coming through in expressing, what they saw with that. Others were kind of stepping back. And so in knowing and observing that, we adopted a cohort model with that. And so what we did is we reached out to 5 of our principals based on the number of schools that we have. We knew we could get about 5 cohorts together that would have about 3 to 4 of them in it. We also devised a cohort for teacher leaders or assistant principals for those to help bolster our high schools, as well as others that might be assisting principals with those observations. And did a leadership piece with them as well too. And so as we talked about what those expectations were going to be, we brought them alongside with us, did specific training with them. Allie came in on site to do that. And we talked with them about, let's look at domains 1 and 2. What are we going to coach our colleagues in? And then we carved out time, instead of having traditional principal meetings, we would give them a month and beyond to allow them to meet with their cohorts, to go into each other's buildings. And suddenly the live observations that they were doing, the video observations now became live observations. Once again, with the hope that by having multiple evaluators in there, they could maximize that for the work they were doing themselves as principals. It worked in some cases, but not in all. But still, we had really great feedback from the idea that they were norming together, having those conversations, but in a more intimate setting. So then come September, we actually have that observation cohort with our leaders. We clarify more around domains 2 and 3, because September knows that we're going to be making that stretch into the second quarter, looking ahead to Q3. And once again, we're able to do some of that observation norming live in classrooms, and giving, again, time beyond that for the cohort leaders to go back to their colleagues within that cohort setting, and then model that. What we did with them as cohort leaders was modeling for them to take back to their cohorts. As we approached January of 2020, once again, we reviewed what the expectations would be within that 4th domain and started to have those conversations again around the group norming, helping our cohort leaders with what they would take back to their cohorts. and then started that process as we hit February. And then kind of life as we knew it changed. And so as Ali shared, we modified our own timeline with respect to that. Thankfully, a lot of the focused observations we were doing at that particular point had happened by the time that we were out of our buildings physically for the remainder of the school year. And we were able to really kind of talk more in a modified version with respect to what that professional responsibilities area should look like, and how principals could close out the year of evaluation and performance review with their teachers. And that led us to year 3. The support that we provided there, of course, was much more modified. In October, we again decided that we wanted to continue with our cohort leader model. It had been by far, we had the most movement, I would say, with respect to the action of our principals. We were actually starting to get some aggregate information that we could bring back together as a group and review together. They were seeing personally, because of how we had crafted the observation instruments, was feeding into a document that we could pull some true data to say, where do we see across the system that we're struggling, and help us to know how to build in some more supports there. So as we met in October, we did that virtually. We really focused on that internal instructional review, which basically were their plans. And so we had our cohort leaders turn in some what they considered some model lesson plans and unit plans to be able to look at. But then we were able to sit down together and do that norming process. Let's talk through this. Where do we see a beginning, performance? Where do we see innovative going on? Once again, modeling what we wanted them to take back to their colleagues. What we hoped that they would be able to take back between October and after the first of the year, as we know, once again, had to make some more shifts again, because it was just, they knew they weren't going to be going into each other's buildings. But once again, those challenges that came with them being able to meet together, but still were able to provide direction with respect to planning and preparation, so that they would be able to give that feedback to their teachers. That leads us to March of 2021, and we use that as an opportunity not only to clarify Domain 5 again and to refocus there as they're preparing to give that final feedback to their teachers in a more summative manner. But then we also used our cohort leader time together as we gathered together in person to really give feedback overall about where we felt we were at, and talk about that planning for next steps, and what start to really imagine what the 21-22 school year could start to look like. And that leads us to our next steps and where we go from there.
So where do we go from here? Our next steps looking into the 2021-22 school year is that we are planning on to have full implementation, all 5 domains, full implementation in all of our schools, and continually meeting with those cohorts and our school leaders, and just making sure that they have all the supports that they need to be able to do this successfully. We are, again, going to continue to use those observation cohorts. The principal feedback on that it's a highly valued process. I think they very much enjoy that support within their cohort, and even without. I think that they all communicate in one way or another with each other outside their cohorts, but it's a very valuable system that kind of developed out of an organic development, so to speak. And then monitoring of that observation data and professional learning needs. And that was really, again, the reason for this entire new system, was so that we could get that data back here and really monitor where our specific needs are, so that we can continue to grow not only our students, but grow our teachers and give them the supports that they need to continue to do what they need to do in the classroom. And so just really looking forward to being able to kind of mine some of that data more fully next year, and be able to really look and see where our greatest needs lie. Again, I like to think back to that assessment piece and really what we kind of started with Allie, and looking at how do we really use this data to inform our instruction. And I feel like that little nugget is really what led to this entire process, because it's one thing to really give an assessment, whether it's a formative or a summative, but then what do you do with that data? Once do you put it in a drawer and then it never is looked at again? And how do you really take that data and use it to inform your instruction? I think that's where this all started. And so really seeing the fruits of this, and now how do we help our teachers develop and grow so that they can support their students' learning and growth.
Thank you, Allison. So we had a question come in. Did patterns of need for teacher development appear? What was the most common need? And Diane, we started seeing some differences even across different grade bands. So do you want to speak to that a little bit, particularly after that first big set of data that we had come in?
Yes, and I'm trying to think back. You talk about, wow, how far we've come. When we looked at that, one of the things we saw quickly were really trying to help teachers to stretch what they, and it was interesting when school leaders, our principals would present, who they felt like were just like, this is my A+, my rock star teacher. But then when we would come together, not only when we were norming, but we were starting to look at some of that data across the system, we were starting to see that maybe that wasn't, those qualities they weren't there in practice. And oftentimes it was like if they just did one extra thing, one extra piece that stretched them really into that next area of improvement for them. The other thing, one thing that was very, I can remember directly when we were talking about looking at some data over a classroom environment, that we found really quickly what many of the teachers took to believe as far as their inclusion of Catholic identity in the classroom looks really different across multiple buildings. What that meant for an elementary classroom versus some of the high school classrooms. And so really being able then to have those conversations together across the table with other principals, or when we were seeing a school that just seemed to be really knocking it out of the park in the area, asking, what are you guys doing for this? Like, how are you tackling, a particular, in this additional infusion of Catholic identity into the classroom, or what strategies might you be using so that it can be replicated in other places? There's a question that just asked specifically about how do we obtain that classroom observation at the diocesan level. And this is a little plug. We will be sharing a future webinar soon, and really to kind of talk about the technology behind that. We were very fortunate. One of our former colleagues who will be a part of that presentation with us, a former associate superintendent who has returned back to one of our Catholic high schools, Rachel Dowell, she is a master at Google Classroom. And so we were able to really build out through Google Documents not only our observation tools that principals were able to use. The desire was that it would be electronic, so they could do it as they were in the classroom doing that walkthrough. But we know some wanted the ability to be able to print that off and write them out, make notes, and put it back into the system later. And so by doing it in that format, just simply using a Google form, we were able then to pull and aggregate all that information together, and then start to pull some reports from that. And we have not had as much of that this year because we really tried to relax tried to take some of the obstacles off the table and barriers for our principals, and just be able to give as much feedback as they could. But in the previous 2 years, we were really able to sit down, pull that information, and then show them not only system-wide across grade bands, but then they had their own individual school reports and could start to look to see, there's some teachers here that I realized I could stretch them a little further and really move them into that from beginning to developing. And it's been very impactful with how we've been able to approach planning, not only from a system level, but we've been able to connect schools together as well too, to say, we've got a couple of communities that might be struggling in this same area, and can they partner together for some of that professional learning?
Diane, I think I would also note, I think initially there was some, I don't know if hesitation is the right word, but there was definitely some angst among principals and even teachers about well, this is going back to the diocesan office and they're going to look at my teaching and then, is that going to, and really just stressing with the principals to take back to their communities that what's coming to us is not meant for us to evaluate and to really, have feedback regarding that. What's coming back to us is what we need to use to really inform our planning and our professional development and where the greatest areas of needs are within our faculty and staff. And I think really putting them at ease and letting them know, we're not taking this back. So in the office that we're not just sitting and going through each school and teacher and, that's not what this data coming back to our diocesan, archdiocesan offices is meant for. It's meant for us solely to use for planning. And so I think really stressing that with your communities is really important.
I see there is a question about, was there any faculty resistance? And so to Allison's point, yes, there was a little bit, but I think it was all in the messaging to her point. We have 19 schools in the diocese, and that's primarily in the metro area of Oklahoma City, but we really are the western half of the state. And so we've got some rural areas as well too. That encompasses 3 high schools. And so we really just try to put the messaging back to them. This is really about how we plan for what we provide for you. It's a way to support you. We're not sitting here picking apart, individual teachers in their classrooms. And that really goes back to—
You don't have time for that.
Yeah. That goes back to when we were very intentional about the demographic, what other information, and I can remember Allie putting this back to us, what other information would we want to capture, which is why we chose grade bands, because then we were able to pull to see, about our intermediate elementary grades versus our middle school versus our early childhood. And so that really informed what we wanted to pull, in addition to just the observation tool itself.
And if you'll see the question, Allie and Diane, about ratings, I don't know who wants to take that.
Allie, we can cover ratings. It was another touch point.
So one of the things we really wanted to outline during the course of this session with everyone was the highly personalized approach that we took. It would have been very easy to just kind of go out there, adopt one of the models that was available, but we weren't going to see the same level of congruence as well as success with its implementation unless we were thoughtful at the onset, not only about teacher and student needs, but also with the context and the culture of the place in which we were implementing this, right? So that was very intentional throughout the design process. And quite honestly, it's the reason that we're not just kind of throwing the whole framework out there for everyone, because the process is equally important to the design itself, to go through that and to have those tough conversations about what you truly value in your particular space for students. And a big part of that conversation is going to be a rating system. So while, I shared that we led with the evidence that comes first and foremost on the form, because it's that feedback, it's closing that learning loop that's most important if we're going to see the changes and improvements in teacher practice. We ultimately do need some objective data to guide decision-making at both the school and the system level. So we had to make some decisions at the onset about a 3-level scale versus a 4-level scale. We also had a fair amount of discussion and even ended up changing after some initial feedback from principals as to what each of those specific performance levels were going to be titled. So, in many performance models, you might see an unsatisfactory, a beginning, a developing, and a proficient. We knew that proficient level was going to be a reach, even for some of the strongest teachers in the system. And it was designed intentionally to push expectations. So where we ultimately settled was with 3 performance levels focused on beginning. You were just starting out, but you certainly by no means were unsatisfactory in these specific performance areas. Developing, you were continuing to improve your craft. And then finally innovating. We wanted to ensure that if we were really marking that 3rd performance level, that it wasn't just proficient, it wasn't just satisfactory, it was a true marker of exceptional performance that was going to push the Archdiocese forward. Do you want to speak a little bit to some of the logistics here, Diane?
Yes, actually, I'm happy to share it. So our last question just asks about the intimidation factor with this, because and I think we spoke to that a little bit as well too, because we did at many points we kind of step back a little bit with that. The number of observations per teacher each year, what was one of the initial challenges that we did face with them. It told us quickly that it had not been the practice of some of them, so that was a whole other conversation. But we also then it gave us pause to talk about. Can we start to, as we mature more with this, to be able to, a newer teacher or a teacher that needs a little bit more attention, where they are doing more of those, there's a greater frequency, versus can you start to be able to parse out of that when you've got a teacher that, once again, is consistently, is achieving where you need them to, and there's not those open concerns. And so that is very much one of the conversations we've had. And then, not requiring that it's a personal meeting after every observation. The idea is that they can give a feedback form to them. We've really tried to give some autonomy to the principal about how they want to handle those conversations, knowing there must be a summative piece at the close of the school year as we're wrapping that up. But how they do those other pieces throughout the course of the year, we've really given them some freedom to be able to do that. Because once again, this does serve as the documentation of the evaluation process, but we want it to be focused on growth.
So we know we're out of time. We just wanted to highlight some upcoming related NCEA webinars that will be a follow-up to this around collecting the data itself, getting into more of the technical aspects, as well as how that data is being analyzed for professional learning purposes at both the principal and the teacher level. We have shared our contact information here. We would love to stay in touch and answer any additional questions that you may have. If you missed that code at the beginning of the session to get all of the materials, I also tweeted it out on the conference hashtag, so you can access that there as well. But thank you so much for engaging with us this afternoon. And we hope this has been helpful as you look to improve not only pedagogical practice, but also deepening our collective Catholic identity.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you all for attending this live session at NCA 2021. Please make sure to complete the post-session survey and use this opportunity to check out other live and on-demand sessions, our learning lounges, our virtual exhibit hall, and so much more. We'll see you soon. Thank you.